Hi and welcome everyone. ABCT and the Student Membership Committee is thrilled to put together this webinar, all focused on talking about international trainees and the experience of being in a graduate program, pursuing research and clinical training. I'm Marilyn. I'm a member of the Student Membership Committee, and I'll be co-leading our webinar with Marielle.
Hi, my name is Marielle. I am a student member of ABCT and I'm glad to be here.
So what we're hoping to do is just basically take the next several hour or so and just kind of cover each part of the training experience from the perspective of the international trainees that we have here tonight as panelists. I'll go around and let each one of them introduce themselves and share a little bit about their background, where they are in their training process, and then we'll jump in.
My name is Inés González. I'm from Spain, and I'm here at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley, very at the south of Texas. And I'm going to start my 4 years in the clinical psychology program here.
Hi, I'm Miho, and I'm from Tokyo, Japan. I graduated from a college in the US, but for the past 2 years, I've been working as a research assistant in a few labs in Japan. And I'm starting my PhD in clinical psychology this fall.
Hello everyone, my name is Shu Chen. I'm a 4th-year PhD student in clinical psychology at Columbia University. Before coming to my PhD program, I did my undergrad education in my home country, which is China.
And hi, I'm Vinu. So I'm originally from Malaysia and I came here about 9 years ago. I did my PhD in clinical psychology at Hofstra University, and I'm currently a postdoc at McLean Hospital with the Harvard Medical Center in Boston.
Welcome, everyone. So we're going to start just by having some kind of open-ended questions just to start talking about the graduate program application process, and then move on and talk a little bit about graduate training, both research and clinical itself. And then as we have the time, kind of talk a little bit about looking ahead to the future, picking clinical internships. Vinu might be able to share a little bit about how she went about looking at postdoc positions and then thinking beyond. So I guess just to kind of get us started, how did each of you go about picking graduate programs? What did that process look like? What program qualities did you look for or prioritize?
For me personally, I had a specific research interest, so I looked up, professors who do research in that area, and then I applied to the programs that have the professors. But I think I should have looked more at what kind of programs actually do accept international students with full funding, as opposed to partial funding, or some schools also don't even accept international students who don't have their own funding. So I feel like I should have researched more about that before, wasting tons of money on applying to schools that don't even consider you in the beginning.
My case was a similar experience. I picked up the program I had because my current mentor and her research interest, that it was the same that I was having. And also we have in the future, similar type of research interest, right? So that was one of the biggest thing that made me pick this program. Also, as Miho was saying, funding is really important. So I'm lucky that my program has enough funding and they are very supportive in that sense. So in my case, those were two very important aspects. And a third one that, I'm bilingual Spanish English, right? So the area where I'm at, there are many Hispanic populations. So they were also looking for people that could speak English and Spanish to be able to do therapy in Spanish as well. So that was also a really good point in my case.
I might be the oldest one here, so I don't know how relevant it is, but I think similar to what people said, the three things was like geographic location, research interest, and then funding. That's really important. But I think the geographic part for me was really important, being in like, I did my master's in New York, wanted to stay there because there was such a large international community, and a lot of the work I wanted to do was more international work. So that really made a lot of sense. But then the funding is like obviously a really big important part as well.
I agree with like what everyone said here. For me, I consider funding, research interest fit as well as the location. And in terms of the location, I initially actually think that I wouldn't care, and I only found out that I do care when I went on some in-person interviews. And as both an international student and as also someone who's openly gay, I do feel like that. How open the environment is, whether it's like more conservative or liberal, does make a difference in your quality of life. Uh, After all, it's a 5 to 6 year commitment.
I really appreciate you raising that point, Shuchen. I think it's like important to like, there's so much pressure on applying and what to do once you get an offer. And at the same time, it's like, this really is like a 5, 6, sometimes 7 year commitment to a certain location. How, how did you all go about prioritizing, like once you did have like a selection of schools, or once you did have an offer to consider, how did you weigh like the geographical considerations with like the quality of the program, or like the quality of the research or clinical opportunities that you'd have there?
For me, I didn't mind small town because that would mean like, it's less expensive to live there. And also I did my undergrad in Iowa, so I was kind of used to that. But I did make sure to talk to students who I guess look similar or who look like me, like Asian students, whether they're from the US or international, to ask and I tried to ask about their experience living in that town, and that was really helpful for me.
In my case, I'll say that it was my match with my mentor, my supervisor. Like we get along well, we understand each other, and that was a key factor for me to decide to came to the US. That is a big change, a big commitment. So in my case, that was one of the biggest things.
I only applied in New York knowing that I didn't want to leave. So I kind of made the restriction on myself because I'm indecisive. So I was like, I'm just going to apply here. But then within New York itself, I think a big one was just I was lucky at the time. I did a lot of in-person interviews, and that was such a huge factor. Like you just felt the vibe, and I didn't want to be somewhere super competitive. And I could kind of tell like the relationship with the mentor, you kind of observe that in the interview of how the students interact. Also looking at the kind of applicants that they had, how diverse they were. That's like all little hints that give you a sense of like, okay, this was for me.
If you all had like just a few words or phrases to offer to other international applicants, like what would you recommend that they prioritize or think about as they go through the selection process?
I think for me, well, things are like generally easier, I think, when there's at least one international student prior to you. And in the program that I'm attending actually does have one international student, and like, she advocated for herself and also other international students. So like the program director and like people who are assisting students were aware of certain restrictions that international students have. So yeah, I would ask whether there is any international student in the program, and yeah, how the program supports those students like financially or yeah, or other stuff too.
Well, I do think that the financial part is really important. So it's what I would prioritize. Like, I wouldn't be able to be here if it wasn't for that, right? So I think it's the key, the most important aspect when you're applying, taking check on that.
I would combine Inez and Mijos, which is, it's much easier when, same with me, there was a person before me, and so it was a lot easier, but that also led to then advice on international students, like you can take this job, you can get this funding, you can do those kinds of things. The program director supervisor were aware of that because there was like another person there.
Let's dive in maybe a little bit more towards like the actual like application process. So after you all had interviews, talk to us a little bit about like the pros and cons. Each of you have gone through the application process at various stages, right? And as we look towards like a future in which we might have the option of doing things either virtually or hybrid, what do you all think are the pros and cons of you know, doing in person versus virtual, and kind of any guidance that you might share with other trainees who are faced with that decision?
Well, I did one interview in person. So what I want to say here is, it depends from where you are coming. You probably are going to have jet lag. I don't know what time of the day, but that's important to consider while you are having interview, right? Because you want to be 100% of yourself. So consider that if you can travel some days before to rest a little bit, do it. In my case, I have really bad jet lag, right? So I let the people that was doing the interview know that I'm just travel from Spain. I'm having a little bit of jet lag. I'm feeling a little bit dizzy, so that might impact also a little bit the way I'm doing the interview, right? So that's important to consider, I think, at the time of doing in-person interviews.
Yeah, I had all my interviews virtually, and as someone who lives in Japan, that was like, you know, great because, you know, I also didn't have to take any day off from work, and yeah, and I didn't have to spend a lot of money on traveling. But the downside is that my interview started at 1 a.m. and ended at 9 a.m. So that was a little bit difficult for me. And also because, well, I didn't get to um, travel to the town and I didn't get to see it in person. So that, yeah, was, I guess, downside. But yeah, I did make sure to ask other students who, yeah, other Asian students about their experience because, yeah, I, I did want the program and the town to be like friendly and yeah, so yeah, but yeah, besides that, yeah, I did like the online interview experience personally.
So I did a hybrid. So for some school, I did in person, and others I do virtual. Because I wanted to do interviews within the 2 weeks that I were in the United States. I did my interviews in 2018. So I was able to visit 3 different universities, and I did the rest remotely, either when I was in China or when I was like traveling in the United States. I would say that I do think in-person interviews, they offer some opportunities to learn about the town. And particularly, most of the time, I would say I would look at whether or not the place is some place that I would feel comfortable staying. And also, sometimes I feel like a grad student, when you are talking with them in person privately, they seem to be more open to share their experience. Um, I remember going to a university and there was one international student who was being really upfront about her not so positive experience. And then I also saw a slogan in the town that says "Go Home Dreamer," which let me know that I won't be happy at this place. Um, that being said, I think there is also a financial cost to consider with those traveling. They do provide some reimbursement, those places that I went visiting, but it's not a lot. So I need to like consider how much saving I have and how much visit I can afford. So I think they have their pros and cons. And I'm hoping that moving forward, as more universities choose to do virtual interviews, maybe that difference would be minimized.
Yeah, there's a lot of pros and cons of interviewing. You can get a feeling for the place, but also it is very expensive. And not every program provides reimbursements, like you said. So stepping back a little bit, would it be okay if you guys talk about how you guys were able to build your CV to gain research and clinical experience, and maybe talk about if there were specific experiences you highlighted in your graduate application, like your personal statement, research statement, and doing the interviews?
Well, every country is different and every university is different, right? So things work differently. In my case, I highlight a lot of volunteer work that I was doing. I didn't have the opportunity to, I was doing research, but I didn't have the opportunity to have like a research assistant back there in Spain. So, but I was doing that research. So this research, so that was good. And other than volunteer work, I think, I mean, as international students, we have the strengths, like we might be bilingual, we might have other different experience. So I think that's really important to highlight in a CV when you are applying.
Yeah, for me, when I was doing an undergrad in the US, I was volunteering at a crisis center, and I also did research at my college, and also during the summer at some other lab. Um, and then like after I graduated from college, I returned to Japan, and well, like my country doesn't really have a much. I guess it's not really common for people to engage in like research work before entering PhD programs. So it was a bit hard to find opportunities, but yeah, what I was able to find something, but they're not sometimes they're not really like they didn't really understand why I'm leaving after a year or like because like for them they thought it was like a permanent position. But yeah, but I was I guess able to build some CV. I did feel like because it was not in the US, some like even though like my current supervisor like she's very like influential in the field, especially in like Europe. Um, like many like professors in the US weren't aware of the work that we were doing. So that was a bit discouraging, but yeah, I did. Yeah, so I think yeah. So, but yeah, that's been my experience.
Mine was a little different because I went to undergrad in Australia where they do a 3-year degree. So I couldn't apply to grad schools because it didn't count as like, or some schools were like, well, it's a bit hard to translate. So that's why I came and did my master's, which then actually afforded me opportunities to then I worked as a research assistant and was able to gather experience that way to build my CV. And I kind of had a similar thing with Miho. I tried to get some experience where I was in Malaysia, but it wasn't like really recognized and people didn't really know. And so I was like, okay, I guess if I go there, that might open more doors and that might help. But I think nowadays there's I see a lot of people doing either like master's or like post-bac programs, which wasn't a thing when I was applying. Like there was not, it wasn't very like popular. So I think if you are having trouble either building a CV or like figuring out, looking at like kind of an interim program, and some of them are funded. If they're like funded through a research study or something like this, you can do it that way. I know a couple of people who have done that. The other thing is there are a lot of American researchers who do international work, and they're kind of based here, but and now with, especially after COVID, they do a lot of online stuff. So you can kind of partner with like, so New York, like New York State Psychiatric Institute has tons of researchers and a lot of them do international work. So you can do that, you know, to try to help boost your CV as well. But I think trying to get as much of a variety of experience and in whichever way that connects to places that people might know in the US probably would be most helpful.
But yeah, it sounds like it is very hard, can be very hard for folks to get experience in the international researcher. You guys mentioned how different it is from like being the US versus other countries. So I'm wondering how, what was your experience as international trainee, graduate researcher and clinician, since it's very different from your home countries?
Well, the first year is really, it's challenging, right? Because you had to, in my case, I learned psychology in Spanish, right? So there are many terms, many words that it takes a time to like learn it more, to use it in English, right? So that was a bit challenging at the beginning, but now that I learned how to do it, I'm able to do it in Spanish, for example, right? But I say that relearning everything in another language and how to do therapy is, in my case, it will be one of the biggest challenges.
Not as much as like going home during grad school training. I think there's so many things I could say about what is challenging as an international student, but I did find that having to explain, like it takes me 2 days to get home and 2 days to come back. And then if I'm only there for like 3 or 4 days, it doesn't quite make sense. But trying to navigate that during grad school, that it's not like, oh, I'm just taking, you know, 2 weeks off or something to hang out. It's like to see my family once a year. And finding like support for that. And again, I think that goes back to geography. Like if you have people around you who are also international students and they understand how hard it is to be away from home and asking for time off. I think the other thing is also just all the different like visa stuff that kind of comes up. Like people can, you know, work in different places and get paid for different experiences, and you can't, and you have to kind of figure out some of that too, which can get a little tricky. But again, like having, I think, support is helpful. And then the cultural, like when you land and trying to figure it out, that part can also be working with Americans and trying to, for me, was like just understanding the relationship, how they viewed me, how they viewed like accents and all those kind of things was a bit of a surprise for me when I first got here too. It was surprisingly more for my husband, who's French like me, because I went to an American school, it was a little less, but he was like misunderstood a lot, and I was a bit like, oh, I didn't know that that was like a thing. But yeah, so many things.
And I think that like for me, one of the key challenge when I first got to the United States is because I didn't do my undergrad in United States. I feel like that to some extent I lack some institutional knowledge, if that makes sense. In that light, I feel like that there are additional things that I need to figure out. For example, I need to learn how to do a IRB from scratch because things work differently in my home country. And then I know that I learned that there are different type of employment on campus, off campus, and then they require different kind of procedure. And then who do you need to report to when you want to do this? And are you eligible for that departmental grant? Sometimes yes, sometimes no, because of where it's from. And so I think just navigating that and also at the same time try to build a network And I also want to concur that like going home has been increasingly challenging, particularly after COVID. I think for because my home country have a very strict policy. So right now, if I were to come back, I need to quarantine for 21 days. So it doesn't make sense. So I actually haven't been going home since I mean like it would be 3 to 4 years now.
Yeah, there's a lot of challenges for all of you. There was language, but also going back home and and not knowing about certain resources. So I'm wondering if you guys can talk a little bit more about what kind of support you guys got from supervisors from your program in finding these resources, and even giving you certain resources for learning terms in a certain language, for example.
In my case, I think I'm lucky. For example, my supervisor, she's not from US, so she fully understands what is coming to a country, the stress, and all the impact that have in your life and in your mental health. So I was lucky in that sense. And then my program has been very supportive, and it's a new program. I was the first from the first cohort, first international student, so they were figuring it out at the same time that I was. So they were very supportive with that. And something that I wish I had done more often, contacting the international office from my university. Is I don't know what I didn't that more often about questions that I had, but they can help you with that. With what tasks I had to fill out. Can I work as a teacher during the summer? My visa allows this, no. So this type of small things that sometimes you don't know. They can help you a lot with that. So that's important to keep in mind, the international office.
I went to the writing center on campus in my first year, and they were actually surprisingly helpful, I would say. And they also form writing group, and most of the time, um, they are like passionate graduate students from other graduate programs that wants to really build a community to help. And in addition to like concrete help with practical skills, I also make a lot of friends there. So I consider that a really helpful resource. And in addition to that, I would say that I was a little reserved about expressing the challenge that I was experiencing in the first semester. But when I actually open up to uh, a supervisor and my advisor who I feel like that I can trust, actually I get lined up with resources, people that I get to know and help me better navigate these challenges. So I feel like that if you can find someone that you can trust, either an advisor or a supervisor, I think sometimes speaking up about the challenges that you are experiencing may open up some opportunities for you to better handle those difficulties.
Yeah, I would echo the same in the writing center, even for like when you have to do internship applications or like any kind of like cover letter type of stuff, because that was new for me to write in that style of like talking yourself up or more flowery or that kind of thing. I'm very like direct. So definitely going to the writing center was helpful. And I agree with the supervisor and the program. I had a very, very supportive supervisor. And even if she hadn't had experience, she would like connect me with somebody else to try to navigate that. And similarly with what Shuquan was saying, I also was hesitant in the beginning, wanting to be like, I'm really resilient and I'm grateful to be here and I'm not going to say that I'm struggling. And then suddenly was like, I really want to go home and I'm homesick, that kind of thing. And they were really, really supportive, because I think anyone can understand. And when you explain like how complicated it is, like people really do like try to support you. And same with the international student office. I also didn't really check in with them much, thinking I didn't need to, and then found out that not only do they have resources for like jobs and visas and stuff, but they can also set you up with immigration lawyers. They have like a network. So if later on in your studies you need to think about doing that kind of stuff, they actually are like really great at helping with that. So, and then they also host like events and things, which I didn't know about till later, which can be a nice way to meet people as well.
Yeah, it sounds like the Ryan Center and just being open about seeking help from certain services like International Student Center and Supervisor. Going back a little bit, you guys mentioned that the clinical experience could be challenging, maybe being misunderstood, or there were any microaggressions. Can you guys talk about what you guys have experienced and maybe how you dealt with it?
Well, I said that it's scary at the beginning, like thinking I'm gonna do therapy in English, like what if my client doesn't understand me? And if they don't, at the end, the thing is like, it doesn't matter. If you build a rapport, I mean, they also learn a little bit about your accent. I end up understanding like some people needs a little bit of time to pick up your accent, right? But then it's more important the rapport that you are building with them, that they might not understand every word that you say every time. So, and it's okay if you had to repeat it again. So what I learned here is like, you had to be very clear since the beginning with your clients, like, hey, you don't understand me, let me know, it's fine, right? And at the end, what was good, because it was challenging my fear, right, is that it doesn't matter that much, your accent. It's more important the other therapeutic things.
I think also it's similar to just what I said earlier about being open with the supervisor. I had a lot of fear in the beginning of like that something would happen, like someone would say, oh, I don't want to work with her, or you know, in the first session, and that's like everybody's biggest fear, or that, you know, complain about me, like, oh, she was not competent or something like this, and because she's not American, or, you know, whatever it might be. But I think having spaces like that's what supervision is for, like with your clinical supervisor. So I would talk to them a lot about that, and they would be really helpful to at least help me navigate kind of what Inez was saying, like it actually, if that happens, like what would we do? How would we support you? What would you be comfortable with? Like all this stuff. And it actually really didn't happen very much or at all. It was like, you know, maybe tiny things, but really nothing that big happened. Again, I was in New York, so that was a little bit different, but I think just like really like going with having good supervision and supervisors was very helpful. And then like just your cohort, like whoever you end up going to grad school with would be like very supportive, because something would happen to another person in the program who was an international student, and we would try to help her and, you know, support her and that kind of thing.
Several of you have touched on like the importance of mentors and like supervision. And I'm just kind of curious, like looking back now, if you had to give yourself or someone else advice on like what to look for in a program, like what would you be looking for? What sorts of qualities in a supervisor, or asking other students when you are making those decisions? Like, what do you think are the ways to kind of figure out, is this like a supportive environment to be able to have those like more vulnerable conversations?
I mean, I don't know about what I will be asking to other students, but I think communication is key, like open communication, that there are no misunderstandings, everything is clear from the beginning, are key aspect to do with a mentor. And I mean, and if you ask the students, whatever they say, you can, I mean, even they're lying, you can pick up these things, like if they are happy or not, if they're talking with passion about the mentor, or they are just like giving facts, right? So you can pick up on those things. So that's maybe something that people can keep in mind.
My boss that I was working with at the time asked me to ask this question. It was the craziest question, but it was actually really helpful. And he asked me to ask everyone, if you could go to grad school here again, like, would you? Like both to the supervisor and the grad student. And actually people were really honest. Like I had some professors who were like, no, I wouldn't. And this is like, why? And that kind of thing. So that was one way. But I think at the end, it's like, it's a feeling, it's a vibe. Like you can really pick up like the tension and like the supportiveness.
That's a very telling question. I'm so glad you shared that, because I think it can be hard to figure out like what is the right way to get the information you really need to know at the end of the day. Perhaps you all could talk a little bit about like, are there certain guidelines or requirements around choosing clinical practica or internship sites?
Well, in terms of practicums that I've been doing in a couple of sites so far, and this semester I'm gonna start a new site. In my case, is in line with my research interest. I'm more in trauma, so I want the place I'm going that is more focused on trauma, or they have probably more trauma cases. And the second one is not very far from my house that I can Uber to, because it's a big thing also in the US, in Texas, about all, like there are no public transport, right? I guess New York is completely different, but here in Texas, everything is really far you can have to travel maybe 1 hour every day to go to your place of work, right? So for me, it's important that I know it's not that far that I can go. So that's something to keep in mind.
I think the obvious one is VAs, like we can apply to VAs. And then sometimes it gets a little bit confusing with like when the VA is associated with a school. So if the funding comes from the school, you're kind of okay. But if the funding is coming from the VA, so like I remember UC San Diego, I really liked this track and then found out it's actually a VA sponsored track. So then I wasn't able to apply to that. So just checking that, I think that would be the only one I can think of.
And then I also remember like I was like looking, I just finalized my site this past week. So some of I know that I couldn't apply for VA, but for practicum, I do know that some VA take extern. They are like volunteers, so I think some of them do consider them. But I know that now that I cannot go to a VA setting in the future, I just decide to avoid from the get-go. And another thing I noticed, even within one internship site, there are positions that take international students, and there are some that don't take. Just like what we just share. For example, Brown. I think some of their tracks take international students. Others cannot because like some of the funding were driven from VA. And I used to think that hospital settings they would typically consider international students. But then when I check the epic, some of them don't. So I think it would always be helpful to check. And usually it's for various reasons. I actually emailed an internship site director who told me that they cannot take international students because they cannot sponsor visa. And then I explained to her that I don't need you to sponsor my visa. I do have a CPT. She seemed confused and she said that this is something new to her. So I do think that sometimes it would be helpful to check with them if like this information is not specifically specified on their website or their app.
It sounds like we're bringing up issues of funding again and just like requirements around the visa process. Could you all share a little bit more about like specific details around visas or sponsorship or choosing sites? Like who would you talk to get that information or to ask follow-up questions?
So for me, it was the international office. I just would email them. And that's how I found out that if you like to do internship, you can do a CPT and it just has to be less than 365 days or whatever. And then you can do, because I was thinking about postdoc and was like wondering how to stay after. And so that was really helpful. I think it's also helpful wherever you go, even so I'm at McLean right now, and I only found this out recently, but they have an international office and they do have certain ways to help international students. So if you work here for I think it's like 2 or 3 years, they automatically can sponsor you. So like kind of thinking ahead about where you want to end up can be helpful, because then, like, so if I, came for internship here and then stayed here, eventually, like they would be able to sponsor me. I think also, and I don't know this specific because I've already forgotten, when I was a research assistant, they did this, but like, I think if it's like a university or medical hospital, they have like a way around the H-1B. So they sponsored my H-1B, but it only took like 2 weeks. And I think they paid for like this express thing, but it was like really fast. And they had an international office and knew what to do. But it was like happen chance that I like found out about it. So wherever you go, even if it's a hospital, trying to see if they have an international office that you can reach out to is helpful.
Yeah. And, I also find the international office really helpful. And I think the H-1B you were mentioning, for nonprofit, there isn't a cap. Whereas like for other H-1B positions, there is a cap and one needs to go through a lottery system. And I also think it would be helpful to check if your CIP code is STEM or not, because if your program is a STEM major, then you get 3 years of OPT. And that would give you additional flexibility. And for example, if the program is not STEM and you only have 1 year of OPT and you want to stay, then that would affect how you would consider your postdoc offer. You may want to consider a place that's willing to sponsor your H-1B right away.
So the things that you all are highlighting as like being the most important would be like making a connection, a strong connection early on with like international office, whether that's at your university or at where you're doing internship. And then, to the extent that you can, thinking ahead a few years about, where might be the best place to land, and then using that as like a kind of a point to think about sponsorship. So the extent that you're able to think ahead that far, which is often really hard to do in grad school. But if you can, it might be helpful to be proactive in that way. Let's talk a little bit about like, were there any kind of considerations or limitations around like research fellowships or other like graduate training fellowships that impacted your training experience?
So I haven't had much to that because every time I look into something, I realize that I am not eligible. The one that I have done so far is usually within my department or school. And I actually recently found out that even the international office, they have a student travel award, which is kind of unheard of. And I think just like requires a lot of digging around and trying to find out from their website. And another grant and or award that I think most international students would be eligible are from professional organizations. Those I do get some opportunity to apply. I do have to say that there was one time that I thought since it's a professional organization, I would be eligible. But then when I was about to submit the application, I was told that my school need to be a member institution. And I was like, very complicated, and I wish they were more transparent. So, but ever since that, every time I apply, if they don't make it crystally clear, then I would try to find the contact information and shoot them an email. I'm from this school and I'm an international student. Am I eligible to apply? And I think that would save a lot of application effort for a word that I'm not even eligible at the beginning.
Yeah, I think I was similar. I wanted to do more research or be more in the research track. And it was only towards the end of grad school that I realized like traditional research tracks of like the K Award or going for like NIMH funded projects was complicated as an international student. But I think like organizations also like private funding, there's a lot of private, places that, and it's really like I know this is like a big one, but like obviously Bill Melinda Gates Foundation, they do a lot of like international work, but like those kind of foundation grants can be helpful. I think what's tricky is, again, like your PI is so important, because there are certain NIMH grants you can get, and there are certain K award tracks you can be on, but your PI has to have like experience in that and be aware of it and know how to support you to build you up to be able to do that. So it can get a little tricky because that's like the more traditional track that people take. And then as an international student, you might have to navigate it a bit differently. But during grad school, I think looking up your schools, like, internal awards, there's like APA dissertation awards or ABCT dissertation awards that are out there. And then like the foundations and the private funders as well. Yeah, those would be all the different ways, but it gets slightly complicated, and with a good PI, like hopefully they can help you navigate it.
Yeah, it sounds like the good PI is like the main I'm also foreign, so sometimes words get mixed in my head. But the most important factor of this is having a good PI and that is able to navigate you through the process. But moving away from research and grants and clinical work for a little bit, I want to ask you guys, how do you guys were able to build the community, your personal community apart from the program or within the program doing the graduate training, or in case of Mejo, like how do you plan to do that? I know you did your undergrad in Iowa, so you must have some experience doing that too.
Well, I just say that COVID didn't help at all. So, but people from your lab and your cohort, people from the program, is it people that is going to understand you better for what you are going through, and you can bend better with them. And always, I mean, if you are living in apartment buildings that there are mostly students, or as someone was mentioning before, like international students, they host events that you can also meet people there. So at the end, it's just being very, very open to meet.
Yeah, I think, well, so since even though I haven't really started the program yet, I think we actually already made a group chat of the incoming students in our program, and also have a group, smaller group for international students in my cohort. So, and they've been really supportive and helpful, because, hey, like, do we have to submit this document or like that kind of stuff? We can like, we can remind each other. So that's been helpful. So yeah. And I think I'm gonna have to contact the international student office and see what they're up to as well.
Yeah, I think your cohort, that was a big one for me. And even when you go on practicums, like people you meet who, because it's such a unique process that going through grad school, and then so having a supportive cohort is super helpful, and just being really open. I am not a sports person, but I did rely, my husband was also an international student and played soccer, and he made like tons and tons of friends from like soccer. So if there's like a interest or a hobby or something, that can be like good ways to meet people as well. And like yeah.
Professionally, I think that like within the program, starting a group chat like what Miho just shared, it was really helpful. And I was very introvert at the beginning, and so there was like all the time if there is a outing or a gathering, my initial reaction would be no, I'm not going inside my head. But I try to like ask myself to don't always say no and try to go out a little bit more, and that was really helpful. In that light, I usually end up enjoying them. Behavioral activation, and Personally, I would say that for me, I found local queer community, which for me is really important. And being in New York, that's helped a lot. And so that has been another source of support. Um, and I met some good friends in the community. Yeah, so that are the two major sources that I find helpful. Oh, in addition to friends within the program, I think professional organization is another one. Like for example, now I get to meet all five of you, which is fantastic. But before that one, I was at other subcommittee, and I get to like meet people at other school and learn about their experience.
Yeah. So again, it sounds like thinking ahead, being really proactive and like challenging oneself, even as they're kind of going through this transition, can be really helpful in building a community and thinking kind of big picture about who you want to connect with, who you can connect with. As we kind of wind down for the conversation, I'm wondering if each of you might be open to sharing just a few thoughts about either kind of final words or final pieces of advice that you think really capture, your experience that you'd want to share with other people. These can be things that like we haven't touched on yet, or just kind of recapping what you've already shared. Just kind of final words to close our talk.
I think for us international students and applicants in the admission process, it's never too early to start the processes. Like, for example, I found out about the scholarship and like the fellowship opportunities that are in my country that I couldn't apply to because I was too late. And, if I had that money from, the organizations in my country, that would really increase my chance of getting into school. Or, I also found out that, well, so I did my undergrad in the US. I thought I wouldn't have to take English proficiency exams, but there are several schools that require me to take TOEFL, and I ended up not applying to them because I was too late. So I think it's even, yeah, even if you did an undergrad here, or it's never too early to start thinking about what you would need, and yeah, and also contacting professors and see who they're accepting or which programs are accepting international students.
Yeah, I do agree with Mijo that it's never too early to start because you had to the jury. The first time I heard that word it was when I decided to apply to programs. In Spain, we don't have that type of standardized testing. So as soon you decide to do that, start looking at places. If at the end you don't do it, it's fine. But as soon you decide, take the decision to do it, start also contacting people. I've been always very shy to email people. It's like, oh, I don't want to bother anyone, right? But people, most of the time, they're more than happy to help. So don't hesitate of contacting people, emailing people, asking for help. I think is will be my biggest advice in this sense that because that I made mistakes with paperwork things, right? So asking for help is, I think, is the most important thing in the process.
Uh, for me, I think asking for help is not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength. It's something that I would like to share with fellow international students. And another thing is that sometimes what we see as a weakness, it may also entail some strength. For example, sometimes when we think about language barriers, at the same time, it also means that you are multilingual, either bilingual or triple lingual, or even more than that, and those can be really unique strengths. I remember that like at one of the clinics that routinely they have to turn away patients that only speak Cantonese and Mandarin because I was at that clinic. They were able to line me up with a couple of those patients that had been shuffled around in the system, which make me feel very proud. And I do think that by we bring our unique strengths, while we acknowledge the challenge that we are facing, we also have our strengths. And I think that like seeing those are really empowering and also make a grad school experience more rewarding.
I was actually going to say the same thing. I think when you're an international student, you're so focused on like trying to fit in and assimilate. And actually the things that are going to make you stand out are the fact that you're an international student, whether it's being like multilingual, your experiences, your perspective on the world, being an immigrant, all of that. So I would really encourage people to like highlight that with and advocate for yourselves, for the populations you want to work with, for the perspectives that you have, for the projects, and try to really like show that that's actually your strength, and that's the thing that will like make you stand out.
Well, thank you all so very much for sharing your time and your experiences with us. And I think both speaking from Marielle and I were very grateful to have this opportunity to come together and just talk and learn a bit more about your experience. So thank you again. And with that, we'll close.